to the presentation for History Paper 1, the May-June 2024 examinations. We are going to go through the June paper and try to come out with possible solutions to the questions indicated thereof. And as usual, you know our paper is made up of the section for source-based questions and the section for essay questions. Right, going through the setup of the paper, just to remind each other, we understand that our paper 1 is basically based on the origins of Cold War. That is the first question. And question number 2 is independent Africa, which is a case study for Angola. Then the last question is civil protests from the 1950s to the 1970s, which is the US civil rights movements. Then the section B, which is an essay section. The section has got also 3 questions from question number 4 to question number 6. And the first question is the extension of Cold War, which is a case study based on Vietnam, where we look at the war between the US and the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. Right, and question number 5 is independent Africa, which is a case study for the Congo, where we look at the successes and failures of Mobutu Sese Seko as the leader of the independent Congo. Right, then question number 6 is civil rights protest from the 1950s, which is the Black Power movement. So basically that's the setup, the questions for paper 1, and that remains with the same setting for the phase of this exam phase. Right, so what we need to do here, I'm going to lead you through the discussion of question number 1, which is the origins of Cold War, and question number 2, which is the case study for Angola. Then we'll skip civil rights protests and we'll go to question number 4, which is the extension of Cold War, and I will conclude by looking at question number 5 for the main discussion. Time allows, then we are going to look at the other 2 questions, which is question number 3 and question number 6. Right, as usual, your presenter, your host Conrad Mupinguri, taking you through the discussion. Right, let me quickly go through the questions, lead you to the questions. Right, the questions that you have here, we are looking at referral questions to source 1A. Our source 1A, find that we have source 1A here. The guide to the question is, how did the Marshall Plan contribute to Cold War tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States of America, USA, in 1974? Right, I think we might not need to go back to the history of the Marshall Plan, how it was implemented and why it was implemented. We need to go straight to the questions, because I understand maybe the history of the tensions of Cold War. I think the origins of Cold War, I think you might be having the history of what was transpiring between the capitalistic world and the communist world, and the resultant plans that were put in place to forward the ideologies, to make one ideology appealing to the people and to attract more people following the ideology. There were several measures that were done. We talk of the Berlin blockade, we talk of the Berlin Wall, we talk of such instances as the Marshall Plan, we talk of all those measures that were tried to put in place by the different extreme sides of capitalism and communism to try and make the economic ideology the one appealing to the world and the one that gains more support on a global scale. Right, so what we need to do here, we have a source which is based on an extract from a book titled The Marshall Plan, Drawn of the Cold War by B. Stale. It highlights the political and economic conditions in Europe after the Second World War of 1945. So given this background here, we are saying we want to attempt to answer the questions, and we'll be referring to the source to check where we get the questions and how we answer the questions. Right, maybe before we answer the questions, we need also to be very alert, and we need to be very familiar with how to interpret mark allocation and to be able to determine the nature of the response that is required by the different questions. Right. Like for example, if we go and try to check on our questions here, the first question is consult source 1A, quote opposing views held by the following countries regarding their ideas about post-war Europe, about what post-war Europe would become. This is a one-by-one question and a one-by-one question, which means these are low-order questions. The simplest order of questions, the level 1, whereby you just need to go and extract the information that helps you answer those questions from the sources. The information is available in the source. You just have to go to the source and extract the relevant information answering the question. Then when we go to question number 1.12, it's a 1 by 2. That question, it implies that you need to answer it with a statement. You need to give an explanation of the concept of communism. It's one concept but with 2 marks, which means you should give details to that particular question. Because the mark allocation 1 by 2, it means it's one response with 2 marks. The first one is one response with 1 mark each. So it implies that there is a difference between this type of question and this type of question. And also it means the response that you are going to give here will be a different response from what you are going to give here. And also if you check, also have a 2 by 1. 2 by 1 is not the same as 1 by 2. 1 by 2 is one response with 2 marks. Then this one is 2 responses with 1 mark each to give a total of 2, which will imply that here you need to give 2 different responses, and each response will be with a single mark. You get a total of 2 marks. Then if you again you go to like this one here, which is a 3 by 1, the implication is the same. You need to give 3 responses and each response is worth 1 mark. Then a 2 by 2, it means you need to give 2 responses and each response will be having 2 marks, which means you are giving a detailed response for this question here. And you are giving 2 different detailed responses to that particular question for you to get 4 marks. So we should pay attention to the mark allocation when we are doing source-based questions, when we are answering the questions, such that we won't get surprised at the end when we get the result. You get a result which you were not expecting. Is because maybe you were not giving full responses, or you were not responding to the fullest of the demands of the question. You were maybe ending your response, like for example, you are answering a 2 by 2 question. You give 1 response and you expect to get 4 marks for that 1 response. You can only get maximum of 2 marks for giving 1 response. You need to give 2 different responses answering the question, and not again repeating the same response in other words. There are instances whereby learners tend to repeat the same response, but they present it differently. The same idea is presented differently, then they want to get 4 marks, hoping that they have given 2 responses. That will be a repetition. It means you will only get maximum 2 marks because you have repeated the same fact. Right. That is part of the skills that you should have when you're answering source-based questions. Right, let's go to our question. The question is saying, quote opposing views held by the following countries regarding their ideas about what post-war Europe would become. We're looking at A, the United States, and B, the Soviet Union. What was their perception of post-war Europe? How did they perceive Europe after the war? Right, if we go to our source, the responses we are going just to extract them. We will extract our responses from the source. They are there. Right, if we check here, it says, if we come here to try and check the response of the United States, it reads, for the United States, here, the goal was to promote free trade and open markets. This is the response to question number A. For the US, the United States was having a goal to promote free trade and open markets. That is the response to item number A on America. Then we move on to the Soviet Union. The response is also given here. We also extract the response here. What was the view of the Soviet Union? The Soviet Union tend to find that it's indicated that the goal was to export or spread communism wherever they could. That was their goal for the post-war Europe. They wanted to make sure that each and every country was exposed to the idea of communism. Wherever they could reach, they wanted to spread that, or they wanted to export the communist ideology. So those are the two responses. For America, we have found that the goal was to promote free trade and open markets. For Russia, the goal was to export or spread communism wherever they could. Right, we have fully answered that question. And in short, when you are answering that question, you give the correct response to the correct question. For America, you highlight what America was thinking, and for Russia, you also indicate. Right, we move on to the next question. Explain the concept of communism in the context of Europe after the Second World War. What is the concept of communism in the context of Europe after Second World War? Right, if we are to define communism in its general definition or as a concept, we can define communism as an economic ideology that aims to eliminate social classes. With communism, it's an ideology which is based on elimination of social classes. Social classes, we are saying, people in society are stratified. They are grouped according to some different mechanisms that exist in the society. For example, on economic grounds, we have a group of the elite and a group of ordinary citizens and a group of the poor in the same community. So that has to be eliminated when we are following communism ideology. Or the communism ideology is an ideology that believes in collective ownership as opposed to private ownership. Collective ownership, we are saying all the resources, they should be owned collectively, and the government should be in charge of controlling how those resources are allocated among the citizens of the country, and not to have private ownership of property and the means of production like what happens under a capitalistic ideology. So in this instance, we are saying communism, when we're explaining it as a concept. You explain it as an economic ideology whereby the target is to do away with social classes, and also to do away with collective ownership, to enhance collective ownership, and also to do away with exploitation of classes. It also targets to solve the problem of exploitation. We should not have one class dominating and exploiting others like what happens under capitalism. We don't want exploitation. We want fair treatment of everyone in the economy, and we want everyone to benefit equally from the available resources. We do not want other people to take advantage of others. That is the idea behind the concept of communism. If we are to relate it now to how this concept was supposed to apply in Europe after the Second World War, it was now being feathered by Russia. What was Russia targeting to achieve by feathering the ideology of communism among its European nations after the Second World War? I do tend to find that Russia wanted to unite people of the world across the national boundaries. Was targeting to unite people. After the divisions that were caused by Second World War, Russia, by implementing communist ideology, they wanted to do away with those divisions, and they wanted people to get united across national borders, and they wanted people to get back to working together after the destructive effects of the Second World War. So basically, if you are taking it from the concept from the context of Europe, it means that Russia was aiming to unite Europeans after the disastrous effects of the Second World War, or after the further tension that were there between different nations after the Second World War. That is basically the idea of communism. Right. We move on to the next question. The next question says, give 2 political obstacles according to the source that were faced by George Marshall regarding the development of a European recovery plan in 1947. Right. If we check our source, we try to figure out where we get the obstacles. Right. We want 2 obstacles that were faced by Marshall as he wanted to implement his plan to help countries of Europe recover from the implications of the Second World War. Right. If we try to check here, we tend to find that he's talking about we come here, the goal was to promote open markets. We did that. This process pronounced noticeable Europe needed to improve our country's participation in the program of strongly post ideologies. Right. It talks about the votes here. Right. What was happening here? It talks about votes were needed to approve their country's participation. And those were strongly opposed to the prospect of choosing between the ideologies. Right. What it means here is those countries that were supposed to participate in the Marshall Plan, they were supposed to have a number of votes from the people approving that the countries should participate in the plan. So it was a challenge because remember, different countries were aligned to different ideologies. There was risk that some countries which were prone or which were having a very serious economic problems were not going to get approval from the votes for them to accept or for them to follow the prescriptions of the Marshall Plan. So it was one challenge, the issue of the votes that were needed, which were supposed in instances they would go against or oppose the prospect of choosing between the ideologies. It meant if people were inclined towards communism, they would vote against the country adopting the Marshall Plan. So that was a challenge for the implementation of the Marshall Plan according to what is indicated there. Then we can also look at the other reason. Right. The second obstacle was the issue of domestic approval. Domestic approval was also an issue which was a problem towards the implementation of the Marshall Plan. By domestic approval, we are saying the authorities were supposed to agree with each other on whether they were supposed to adopt the Marshall Plan or they were supposed to apply for the aid from the Marshall Plan, which will imply that within the same government we might be having differences or people might be having different views of how the economy should be run. So it was also a challenging effect that in some other countries there was not going to be approval by the domestic leaders in the very own country, and that was going to pose a challenge towards effective implementation of the Marshall Plan. Right. That is how we answer that question. We move on to the next question, which is question number 1.1.4. Right. Comment on the implication of the statement. The U.S. Congress was reaching its limits on the appropriation of foreign aid to Europe. The U.S. Congress was reaching its limits on the appropriation of foreign aid to Europe. What does that statement imply? What's the implication? Right, the implication is that when we are saying a country has reached its limit on giving aid to foreign countries, it has reached its maximum point of giving aid, or it has reached its last extent of giving foreign aid to other countries. Remember, America was trying to assist or to aid ailing countries which were failing economically. But now, given the Marshall Plan, they were saying it has reached its limit. We are worried about this fact of it being the limit. So what's the implication of that? If we were to look at this statement, what does it imply? Right, we might say it implies that the US was getting through its last options to assist or to give aid to Europe. It was getting through its last options. All its options were now exhausted. That was its only hope. This was its last option that was available to assist struggling Europe, in that instance through the Marshall Plan. Given that it had tried to assist those ailing countries for some time, and in some instances its aid was failing to prove positive results or to prove intended results. But now it had reached its last attempt to try again and help. Or we can say the US was hoping to see a positive improvement in the economies of Europe through its aid after the damages that were caused by the First World War. From the Marshall Plan, they were expecting to see Europe working again. They were expecting to see the economies getting back to work. They were having hopes over European countries which were going to receive the aid. And they were optimistic that those economies were going to get to recover from the impacts of the Second World War, and were going back to get to work. That might be the implication of that particular statement. Right, we move on to question number 1.2. Read source 1b. We are now referring to our source 1b. Right, our source 1b is a source which is based on an extract from a speech delivered by George Marshall, the Secretary of State for the US at Harvard University on 5 June 1974. It provides preconditions that European countries had to satisfy before they could get American economic assistance. Right, the Marshall Plan had got its own prescriptions that were supposed to be abided by for countries to be eligible to get the funding. So the source, as you go through the source, you understand what the source is talking about. But basically that is the idea behind the heading of the source. So we go to our questions. Identify two intentions that the USA government wanted to achieve through its efforts to assist Europe. What was the main intention of the government of the US as they were assisting Europe? Right, if we try to go to our sources, source 1b, you tend to find that it talks about a critical situation which is indicated here. It talks about this issue of alleviating the situation or improving the situation. That is the first response that you get here. To alleviate the situation which was there. Like if we check here, efforts to alleviate or improve the situation. The situation was bad for most of the European countries. They had gone through the damages of Second World War. Now that they wanted to improve, and there was no definite way for them to improve except accepting the aid from America, which came in the form of the Marshall Plan. So it was to alleviate or improve the situation and also help start the European world on its way to recovery. It was also meant to help start the European world on its way to recovery. Those are the two intentions that were put, or that were in USA's mind as they introduced the Marshall Plan. They wanted to try and attain those two. Right? Move on to the next question. Quote 3 reasons why George Marshall believed the USA government should not unilaterally draw up a program to help Europe economically. Right, we were saying should not unilaterally. It's a key concept that you should understand as you attempt to answer the question. We are saying George Marshall was believing that America should not do it alone to come out with a plan of helping European countries, or to come out with a plan of recovering the economies of Europe. Why did Marshall believe that it was not only the duty of America alone? It was the one which was offering the funding. But however, it was not supposed to be the sole duty of America to do the planning or to draw up the whole program on its own without considering the input of other countries. Why was it like that? That is the question. So we want to quote 3 reasons why George Marshall believed in that perspective, that it was not only America which was supposed to come out with the recovery plan or to draw up the plan for bailing out struggling European economies. Right? If we go to our source, we will check from our sources. Right? If we check, it says Europe, yes, it starts from, there must be some agreement among some of the countries of Europe as to the requirements of the situation, and the part of those countries themselves will take in order to give a proper effect to whatever action might be undertaken by this government. It would be neither fitting or efficacious or effective for this government to undertake to draw up unilaterally or individually or alone a program designed to place Europe on its feet economically. This is the business of Europeans. So if we check from here, and we come back to here, you find that there is this issue of why George Marshall believed that it was supposed to be not only the duty of the American government, but rather a combined effort between the American government and other stakeholders towards the implementation of the Marshall Plan. So, if we are to quote, we will find our evidence from the given text here. There was supposed to be some agreement among some European countries as to the requirements of the situation. Here, the requirements of the situation, they were supposed to note the requirements of the situation. What did each and every different country wanted based on their perspective of their economy. So it was not the duty of America to decide or to determine how to assist each and every country or how much to offer to each and every country, because the requirements of the situation were known by the very own country, which was supposed also to be consulted in that event. And also, it says here, part of those countries themselves will take in order to give proper effect to whatever action might be undertaken. They were also supposed to take in order to give proper effect to whatever action might be taken by the government of the USA. And if we also note here, it says it would be neither fitting or efficacious or effective for this government to undertake this. It was very difficult. Was not going to be an easy task or an effective task, or it was not fitting to see America assisting other countries without their inputs. So basically, if we were to quote, we will get our 3 responses from those responses given here. The first one, the requirements of the situation, and the second one, we look at the proper effects. The third one, we said it was neither fitting or efficacious or effective for this government to undertake or draw up a unilateral program designed to place Europe on its feet again. Right. We move on to the next question, which is question number 1.2.3. Right. Question number 1.2.3. It says, explain the implication of the statement. Political passion and prejudice, which is bias, should have no part regarding aid to Europe. Political passion and prejudice should have no part regarding aid to Europe. That statement is quoted from the text. And what is the implication, or what is the meaning of such when they said political passion and prejudice should not be part regarding to the aid to Europe? Right. What that statement means, from the historical perspective, it means aid was supposed to be directed to wherever it was needed. The aid was supposed to be directed to where it was needed. or to be specific, where it was needed most. We're not supposed to be worried about political passion. We're not supposed to be having bias or prejudice. We're supposed to just assist whoever was in need of assistance. That was the original plan of the Marshall. That was the original direction of the Marshall Plan. They implemented the Marshall Plan as a way of resustaining the economies of Europe, which had been affected by the Second World War. So it means that they were supposed to direct the help to whoever wanted the help. And also, if we were to look at it from the other perspective, we would say there was no room to select beneficiaries. Of the funding based on political ideology. The battle that was there was the battle of political ideology or economic ideology, either capitalism or communism. But with the Marshall Plan, we are saying there was no room to select beneficiaries, to select countries that were going to benefit from the fund based on their affiliation to either capitalism or communism. We were just supposed to assist whoever was supposed to be assisted, whether they were coming from the capitalistic world or the communist world. As long as they have applied for the funding, they were supposed to get the benefits of the funding. So basically, we are saying that is the intent, that is the meaning of that statement. That is the basic meaning of that historical statement. Right, we move on to the next question. Right, the next question is question number 1.31, which is based on source 1C. We need to analyze source 1C and check what the source is providing for us as the source providing information to the question that we have in hand. Right, refer to source 1C. If you check source 1C, is there. Source 1C is a source which is a cartoon titled New Light in the West by a Canadian cartoonist, J. Collins. Was published in the Canadian newspaper The Gazette in 1948. It depicts the Marshall Plan as economic assistance to Europe. So if you try to analyze, you are seeing that there is a hand which is lifting the light, and that light is deemed to be the new light in the West. And if you check on the other side, it's written Europe in the new dark continent. Europe is in the dark and it needs a light which comes through the Marshall Plan. And if you check the light here, is indicating a symbol of the dollar, which implies that the light is coming from the US in the form of the United States of American dollar. Right, that is basically what is implied by that cartoon from what we can deduce from what is shown on the cartoon. Right, let's go to the questions. Using the source and your own knowledge, explain why Europe is depicted as the new dark continent. New dark continent. We had the old dark continent. We know Europeans used to refer to Africa as the dark continent, and they used to regard Africa as uncivilized. But now in this instance, we are saying we had a new dark continent. It is now Europe which is now the dark continent, and it's a new continent which is dark. No longer talk of the old dark continent, now talking of the new dark continent. Why is Europe depicted as such? Right. The implication here is why Europe is regarded as a dark continent is European economies were devastated by the Second World War. Because of the impact of the Second World War, Europe was no longer performing the way it used to do. So now it was regarded as a dark continent because of the crisis that it was now going through. Life was no longer rosy, life was no longer lit. It was now dark because people were now having very serious economic complications in their economies because of the devastating effects that were brought by the Second World War. Or we can complement that Europe no longer had its old economic status. It no longer had its old economic status. It was now America which was shining. America was doing well after the Second World War, after reaping the benefits of the Second World War. Now Europe was in a very serious economic challenge, and now America was the one which was shining, which was performing above the norm. And Europe was now performing at very low and unexpected levels. So that is why it is termed the new dark continent. Things were not going well in Europe after the Second World War. And then there was need for a light which was supposed to come from America, which was doing well. Right, we move on to the next question. Why do you think the Marshall Plan was introduced to European countries after the Second World War? Why do you think that the Marshall Plan was introduced? Definitely the Marshall Plan was introduced to revive the economies that were damaged by the Second World War. That can be a definite answer. It was introduced to revive the economies that were damaged by the Second World War. And also we can say it was introduced to improve the general living conditions of people in Europe. The living standards of people in Europe had gone way far below expected. So there was need for an intervention strategy to uplift the living standards of people in Europe. So the Marshall Plan was there also to improve the general conditions of life of people in Europe, in those countries that had suffered the negative implications of Second World War. Or we can also argue that the Marshall Plan was introduced as a way by America to lure countries to follow its capitalistic ideology. We can argue that it was a way of buying support from European countries, giving them aid, giving them help to recover. And then what after the help? Remember, there was this battle of capitalism and communism. So we might also argue that America used it as a way of luring support or getting support from European countries to further their ideology of capitalism. Right. Move on to the next question. Number 1.3. Comment on the significance of the US dollar sign that is depicted as a flame of the Marshall Plan. What is the importance of the US dollar sign as a flame, as the flame of the Marshall Plan? It's the one that is giving light to the new dark continent. Right, the significance, we can say the American dollar was the new light. It was the new light, given that Europe was the new dark continent. The new light would only come with the US dollar. So the US dollar was the only hope for the damaged economies. So it resembles the hope for the damaged economies. And also, if we check it being a US dollar, it also shows that the USA had a significant super economic power. It's significant because it shows that it was only Europe which still had super economic power to assist all the struggling countries of Europe. So by using their dollar, they are trying to show off their superiority to the world, that it's only us who are still having economic strength to bail out countries that are struggling because of the impact of the Second World War. And also we can argue that it was only through the USA that Europe was going to recover. So by using their dollar, they are signifying that it's only through us that you can get light, or it's only through Europe, through America, that Europe can get light. And they can only get that light through the US dollar after their economies were devastated by the Second World War. Right, we'll move on to the next question, number 1.4.1. Number 1.41, it says, we're using source 1D. Source 1D, right, check. Source 1D is an extract from an article titled Moscow and the Marshall Plan, Politics, Ideology, and the Onset of the Cold War by G. Roberts. It focuses on Molotov the Soviet foreign minister rejected the Marshall Plan. Remember, because of the dispute between capitalism and communism, the communist people rejected the Marshall Plan. They blamed the Marshall Plan for different reasons, and they were not happy with the introduction of the Marshall Plan as a recovery plan for ailing European economies. So this is an extract from the foreign minister of the USSR, who also rejected the Marshall Plan. Right. We check here. The question is saying, what according to the source was Molotov's final statement to the conference regarding the Marshall Plan? What was his final statement? Right. If you can check here, the question of American economic aid has served as a pretext for the excuse of British and France government to insist on the creation of a new organization standing above Europe, European countries, and to intervene. That was his last statement. He was clearly showing a rejection of the Marshall Plan and accusing the Marshall Plan for it being a move that was meant to create an organization that was going to dominate Europe and that was going to interfere into affairs of different countries. And at the end of the day, that organization was going to destroy Europe and split it into two worlds. So that was his last statement. We get it from there. Then we move on to the next statement, next question, number 1.4.2. Using the source and your own knowledge, explain why the Marshall Plan was a threat to the Soviet Union. Using the source and your own knowledge, why were the Russians threatened by the Marshall Plan? Right, the first reason there, if you are tracing the background, we know that the Marshall Plan was introduced by the capitalistic world, whilst the USSR was also trying to further their interest of communism. So, why was it a threat to the USSR that the US had introduced a plan to assist other countries? The first and most definite reason is that the Soviet Union was fearing to lose its spheres of influence. Remember, the Soviet Union wanted to spread communism, so it felt like it was going to lose its spheres of influence with the introduction of the Marshall Plan. Countries that were supposed to be influenced and were supposed to be following the ideology of communism were now going to go against communism and were going now to be lost to capitalism, given that they were going to receive support and revive their economies. So Russia felt threatened that it might lose some of its sphere of influences to capitalism, because now capitalism was trying to prove that is the best ideology by giving funding to struggling countries on the economies. And also, if we check, the communist ideology was gradually going to lose its ground to capitalism, because the capitalists were doing something to try and assist the world, try and assist Europe, while the communists hadn't come out with an initiative. It was also a threat, given that they were now going to lose their ground to capitalism because of them not having a fixed plan on the ground, and also losing their popularity. It was now US and its allies who were going to be popular amongst people of the world for doing good to the people. The communists hadn't done anything, and people now would make capitalism a popular ideology, and more people would follow the ideology. Hence, Russia was going to lose support. And also, if we argue that USSR and its allies, they had no standing plan. So it was like the capitalists were more initiative ahead of them. These ones did not have any plan. They hadn't thought of something to assist the world. They did not think of anything to assist their bloc. Even their allies in the same bloc, they did not have a plan to assist them. Then it was a threat to them that capitalists have come out with an idea. We don't have a standing plan to assist our own people. Then what is going to happen? We are going to lose it in the end. So So that is basically why this plan was becoming a threat to the communist world. They were fearing for such because they did not have on their own a standing plan to assist their struggling allies, even to do justice to the struggling world. And yet they were claiming that they wanted to unite people of the world through communist ideologies and avoid exploitation. They were now failing to prove the point. Right, we go to number 1.4.3. Identifying two roads of international cooperation referred to by Molotov. Right, we just go to the extract and check the two roads which are indicated there. There are two roads of international cooperation. One road is based on the development of political and economic relations between states with equal rights. That is one road. It's indicated here. There is another road. Which road is that one? Of international cooperation, which is based on the dominating position of one or several strong powers, as it goes like that. So we have seen that our two responses, we just extract them from the source. They are just extractive questions which we just have to take from the source they are provided. Right, we'll move on to the next question. The next question is question number 1.4.4. Define the term independence in your own words. When you're trying to define a term in your own words, we are not referring to any source. You are using your own understanding of the concept of independence. So how I can define it here? I can define it as self-governance. In short, then you can further elaborate what self-governance is, or I can define it as sovereignty, or I can define it as a state of liberty, or I can define it as unconditional freedom. Right, if you have self-governance, it means you are doing your own things. You have the ability to govern yourself and to govern the affairs of your own country without external control. It's a state of independence. You are independent, you don't rely on the next person. You manage your own affairs in your own country. You manage your politics and your economy on your own without relying on the next person. You have sovereignty. You have the freedom to elect whoever is supposed to lead you in your own country. You uphold democracy in your country. You uphold the will of the people in your very own country. You are a sovereign state. You are independent. You are not dominated by the third party or an external force. Or if you have liberty within your own country, you are free to decide on what you want and what you don't want. And human rights are upheld within the same society. Unconditional freedom, you have freedom which is not under the conditions of someone else. That is basically the idea of independence when you are defining it. We are trying to figure out a situation whereby a state is free from domination, which is coming from a third force or an external influence. Right, we move on to the next question. Comment on the limitations of this source for a historian researching on how the Marshall Plan intended to achieve economic recovery in post-war Europe. The limitations. Here we are looking at limitations of a source. Remember, we have questions which ask on usefulness, and we have questions which ask on reliability, and now we are looking at limitations. We are saying this source has got limitations or is limited. It does not provide us a clear and complete picture of how the Marshall Plan was intending to recover the economy of Europe after the war. What is in the source that guarantees that we are saying this source is limited, has got limited information, or does not give us a true picture or a clear picture, does not give us all the information that we want? Right. Number one that I can argue here, I can argue that this source is limited because it's biased. By bias, you are saying it's one-sided. To whose side? The side of the USSR, who was the who were represented by the foreign affairs minister, which is Molotov. These sources were only hearing the side of USSR. They are saying this Marshall Plan, it doesn't work. It wants Britain, France, and America to dominate the world. They want to influence other countries of the world. They want to create an organization that is going to split Europe into two. We're not hearing the side of America and its allies, how they were intending to put into action the Marshall Plan, but we're only hearing the side of the USSR, which is against the ideology and which rejected the plan. So it's biased, it's one-sided. We can argue that it's limited because it's biased. Then we can also check on this source. Right. It has also some elements of emotive language. We can argue that the source, it has some element of emotive language or strongly negative language. The way Molotov was criticizing the Marshall Plan is too extreme. It's too extreme when it shows complete rejection and hatred against the plan. So it's limited because it has strong negativity and it has emotive language which was used. It does not accept anything positive. It's strongly negative and it's not accepting anything positive. We are not hearing anything about the Marshall Plan which is positive in that source. So we cannot even know how the Marshall Plan was going to effectively get the economies of Europe back to work, because we are only told that the Marshall Plan is a very bad intention which is being planned by America and its friends. They are planning to divide Europe. They are planning to influence other countries. They are planning to interfere in the state of affairs of other countries. It has strongly negative language. It has emotive language. So it's limited because we won't get to know what we want to know. We want to know how the Marshall Plan was going to uplift the economy of the European countries that had gone through the challenges of the Second World War. But we are told that those negative implications of the Marshall Plan, instead of us getting information which is constructive. And also, if you check that source, it does not show the roadmap of the implementation of the Marshall Plan. There's no roadmap there. We don't know how the Marshall Plan was going to be implemented. We are only told of its implications of dividing Europe. There is no action plan there which is indicated that the Marshall Plan is going to be implemented this way. These countries are going to be eligible for the funding, and whatever criteria is going to be used in that source, in that text, to get countries to apply for the loan, and whatever is going to happen to those countries, which problems are going to be solved, we are not told. The source is only focusing on the negative implication. So we can argue that that's the limitation of that particular source. Right. We move on to the next question. The next question is question number 1.5 rather. Moving on to 1.5, a 2x2 question. Study sources 1C and 1D. Explain how source 1C differs from source 1D regarding the Marshall Plan as an economic assistance to Europe by United States of America. Right, those two sources are two extreme ends. One source is saying, source 1C is saying, the Marshall Plan is the new light to the dark continent, new dark continent of Europe. Is praising the Marshall Plan and they're showing the US dollar as the flame which is going to light up the European continent, which is now a dark continent. But if we check here, it's talking about strongly negative impacts of the Marshall Plan and how it is going to devastate or to further worsen the situation in Europe. So we want to check those two sources and show how they contrast each other, or how they portray the Marshall Plan in two different extreme perspectives. Right. We can argue that, and remember, when you are checking these two sources, you need to use the right format of how you compare the two sources, or how you contrast the two sources. The question is saying, explain how source 1C differs from source 1D. So when you are answering this question, you need to answer it using the correct format of answering this type of question. What is the correct format? You say, when you are answering the question, right, source 1C maybe shows this because it's a cartoon, which is different or which differs from source 1D, which states that. This is how you compare the sources. You do not need to use expressions like this source on its own, you explain, then source 1D, you explain. Like you figure out what is in source 1C, you figure something what is in source 1D without showing that you are giving a difference, or you are showing a differentiation, or you are contrasting the two sources. You should show and identify an element in source 1C which is different from what is portrayed in source 1D. This is 2 marks. You do not end here because this is a 2 by 2 question. You need to go and find another difference. You go again to source 1C, find something. Source 1C portrays this, portrays the US dollar what, which is contrasted by source 1D, which says you get whatever I said in source 1D. You get 2 marks. Okay, so at the end you end up getting a total of 4 marks by giving 2 responses where you figure out what is in one source and the other source. You again go to find another example of what is in source 1C and another example of what is in source 1D. This is 2 marks, this is 2 marks to give you a total of 4 marks. So let's quickly go to the responses. The possible responses that we can give to that question is the first difference. We can say source 1C shows the Marshall Plan as the new light in the West. Source 1C shows the Marshall Plan as the new light in the West, which differs from source 1D, which says the Marshall Plan was an intervention in internal affairs of European countries and giving them direction. So you are seeing how those two are different. Source 1C is saying the Marshall Plan is the light, which is supposed to give light to, is the new light which is supposed to give light to the new dark continent of Europe. But in source 1D, they're not portraying the Marshall Plan as a light. They are portraying it as an intervention strategy, which is going to damage the internal affairs of countries, and also which is going to split Europe, according to source 1D. So you see how those two are different. One source is portraying it as a light. We all need light. We all need progress. So a light resembles something which is positive. But in source 1D, they are saying it's a very useless strategy which is going to interfere in the affairs of countries and is going to damage Europe. Then again, if you go find another example, we can say source 1C portrays, or the US dollar is shown as the light for the West in source 1C. Remember, the flame is showing the US dollar symbol. So they are showing that the US dollar is the flame which is going to bring light to the West. And how is it in source 1D? This is different from source 1D, which says this the proposal leads to nothing. If you check source 1D, it says the proposal leads to nothing. And how is it leading to nothing? Britain and France and other countries that are going to follow, they will be split from Europe. So that is a completely different perspective. One is saying the Marshall Plan is having the dollar as the flame which is going to light Europe, and the other one is saying there's nothing that is going to come from there. The proposal leads to nothing. Britain and France and countries following them will separate from Europe. So that is basically how you try to highlight and try to give differences between two sources which portray different historical aspects. Now to move on to the last question, which is using the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph of about 8 lines, which is 8 words, explaining how the Marshall Plan contributed to the Cold War tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. Right, what I want to illustrate here, I might not create the whole paragraph, but I need to give you a guideline of what you should do when you want to answer this paragraph question. Right. Remember, this paragraph question, when it is assessed using a holistic approach, which means the markers won't be marking the points in the paragraph, but they mark sense out of the whole paragraph. After going through the whole paragraph and reading through the paragraph, they will try to figure out if you have written sense and if you have addressed the basic requirements of the paragraph and if there is evidence in that paragraph. So what we do with paragraph questions, we use the PIL format to answer our paragraphs. Right. The PIL format, I think for most of you are familiar with it. The P is for the point. What is a point? This is a clear statement. You give a clear statement and you should answer the question in the first opening statement, or you should adopt a line of argument, a stance, or adopt a line of argument, which means when you are opening up your paragraph, we should find a clear statement which shows us what you are going to elaborate in that paragraph and which answers the question which has been asked, and also which is in line with what you're going to discuss in that particular paragraph. That is the point. And the statement should just be clear. Then the E, we want explanations. Explanation. You are explaining, giving further details to what you have indicated here, or giving further details to the line of argument. Why have you taken that line of argument? What are you going to discuss? We explain, you give further details. And this one here, remember, you do it in your own words. You don't need to copy the sources. When you are explaining, you explain in your own words. Maybe you put a statement after your line of argument, after your point, you maybe put 2 or 3 statements explaining to the effect of the question. You are using your own words, you are not referring to the sources. Because in most of the times you tend to find that the learners, they just go straight to the sources. They do not even give a point which is answering the question. They just go and pick a point from source 1A. They go and pick a point from source 1D, from source 1B. They present those points like that. You are not answering a paragraph question. You need to explain in your own words. Then after explaining in your own words, you now give the evidence. Or this is examples. This is where you use the sources when you are giving examples. And also, you use your own knowledge, because the question is saying using relevant sources and your own knowledge. You are explaining here using your own knowledge. You also give evidence here using your own knowledge, or you also cite examples here using your own knowledge, because you have learned these concepts in class. You must be knowing something about the origins of Cold War. It's not like it's something new that you have just started to see from the source. You have learned about it and you know what happened with the Cold War. So you need to also apply your own knowledge. And when you are giving evidence, you only need to give relevant evidence. It's not every source that has got relevant information to the question. Some of the sources might not be answering the question directly, which means you might not need to consult all the sources, because in most instances you tend to find that learners, they do struggle to find evidence in every source. They want to try and get something from every source. It's not always that there is everything that answers the question in this all the sources. Extract only what is relevant and apply your own knowledge. And when you are extracting information from the source, you credit the source. You write whatever you got from that source and you put the source in bracket at the end. Put the information source also, then this you got it from source 1a. You put in brackets, you cross at the bracket like that. That is how you reference your sources that you would have got from the different sources provided in the question. Right. You don't use any other format. You put the source in brackets at the end of the statement. Right. Then you also need to check on the link. Here we are saying the error is the link. A linking statement, you are referring back to the question. Or we are saying here you are referring to your line of argument. Whatever argument you have adopted here, you need to refer to it back to show that whatever you are explaining is in line with what you adopted in the beginning, so that your argument does not wander around. You have one standing argument which bears evidence and which has some explanations and which is supported at the end. Right. We might not be able to figure out a simple paragraph question, but however, I will try to split the paragraph question into different aspects of the pill, so that we try to figure out what a point is and we go to what an explanation is, what evidence is, and we go to how we link back to the line of argument or to the question which has been asked. So if we check our question here, our question is based on explaining how the Marshall Plan contributed to the Cold War tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. So when you are explaining here, when you are adopting a line of argument or when you are introducing your point, you should indicate if it is the Marshall Plan which made a contribution to the Cold War tensions, or it did not contribute to Cold War tensions. Did it contribute towards the Cold War tensions, and why did it? How did it contribute to the Cold War tensions? You should make it clear in the opening statement of your paragraph. So we are relating to the question. The question is talking about the contribution by Marshall Plan to the Cold War tensions. We should see it if the Marshall Plan contributed, and how did it contribute, or how was it regarded as a contributing factor to the tension between the USSR and America. So you can start your paragraph like you say, the Marshall Plan was a significant factor that further widened the rift between the USSR and the USA, as the Soviet Union felt threatened by the initiative. You are seeing there's a clear point there. You are asserting that the Marshall Plan was a significant factor that further created a rift. You are not repeating the statement in the question, but you are answering it in your own words. You are talking, the question is talking about Cold War tensions, but in this instance, I am using other terms which are in my own words. I am explaining this tension as a rift between the USSR and the USA. And how did it contribute? It made the USSR felt threatened by the introduction of the Marshall Plan. Then we need to explain. I can explain like in my explanation, my point is there. The USA introduced the Marshall Plan to assist the recovery of war-damaged economies of Europe after the Second World War. Its explanation. I continue with my explanation. However, the USSR feared that the Marshall Plan was a way by USA to make capitalism dominate and hence threatening communism, as countries receiving aid were going to be pro-capitalists. Its explanation. I have given my point. I have explained the side of America introducing the Marshall Plan. I have also explained the side of the reaction by the USSR to the Marshall Plan. Then I am now giving evidence That is where now I will consult the sources to try and figure out what I can get from the sources to support what the Americans felt and how the USSR reacted, and how did it contribute towards increased tension between the two extremes. Like in my evidence, I can quote evidence from source 1A. USA wanted to promote free trade and to open markets. This is in capitalistic ideology, which is in source 1A. Then what did the USA also opted to do? Whilst the USA wanted to spread communism wherever they could. So you are seeing that it's a way of creating tension. One is thinking of something else, operating free trade and opening markets, which is pro-capitalism. Whilst Russia is also aiming to spread communism across the world, which is differing in ideology, because communism does not believe in free trade and that thing of opening markets across the world. It believes in collective ownership. Right, I can also quote evidence that the Marshall Plan was viewed as the new light for the West, which is source 1C, is evident there. While also the USSR criticized the Marshall Plan for wanting to split Europe into two groups, that is in source 2D. So we are seeing the tension there. I'm illustrating the tension by means of showing what the Marshall Plan did to this, and what was the reaction of the Marshall Plan to the side of the US, and what was the reaction of the Marshall Plan to the side of the USSR. We are showing the distinctions between the two extremes, and also indicating how these are contributing towards the extension of the tensions between the two sides of USA and the USSR. Then my linking statement, I'm now referring back to the question. As such, the Marshall Plan became the source and contributing factor for the continued tension between USSR and USA. I am referring back to the fact that the Marshall Plan was apparently the contributing factor towards the Cold War tensions between the Soviet Union and USA. So basically, that is how we write our paragraphs. We should write a paragraph in pure format where we present a point or a line of argument which is very clear, and you explain in your own words, and after explanation you find evidence from the sources and you quote the sources that you have consulted. You will also add your own information, your own knowledge, and then you link back your paragraph to the question, and also ensure to be guided by the prescribed length of the paragraph. Right, that was with question number 1.6. We move on to question number 2, which is based on Angola. We are going to highlight the answers where we get the responses as quick as is possible. Right. We got source 2A. Source 2A is talking about, the question is talking about why did foreign countries become involved in Angola civil war in the 1970s. I think we all understand the Angolan situation. Angola was a former colony of Portugal, but however, Angola got its independence, and after it got its independence, there was supposed to be a transitional government to manage the affairs of the country until formal elections were going to be held and a new government was going to be established. But before that was realized, there were tensions that grew between amongst the three nationalist parties in Angola, which is the FNLA, the MPLA, and UNITA. Those were the three standing political parties that made up the transitional government, and civil war broke. And in that civil war, we are now finding different foreign countries being involved. This is a domestic issue in between or amongst political parties within the same country, but we are finding America getting involved, we are finding Russia getting involved, Cuba getting involved, South Africa getting involved. Right, that is basically what the question is based on. Right, so we need to go to the questions and we check the responses as quick as is possible. Right, identify in the source the Portuguese dictator who succeeded Salazar in 1968. I think this is an extraction question. We don't need to waste time with this question. It says here, while France handed its African colonies over to African rulers in the 1960s, Marcelo Caetano, the Portuguese dictator who succeeded Antonio de Oliveira Salazar in 1960, decided to stay in the fight. So our response, we find it here. That is the response to the first question. Move on to the next question. Define the term dictator. When we're talking of a dictator, it's a kind of a ruler or it's a kind of a political leader who has complete control. A leader who has complete control, or who has got absolute power, who does not consult. He makes his own decisions and he has got ultimate rights to decide on whatever should be done. That is a kind of a leader who is regarded as a dictator. We say he has got absolute authority and power. Absolute authority, it means is unchallenged authority. You cannot say anything against what has been said by the leader. So basically that is a kind of a leader who is regarded as a dictator. I think we can mention from the African perspective, we talk of Mobutu Sese Seko of the Congo. He is one notable figure who was a dictator. And you can also talk of other dictators across the world who are renowned and who are still well known in the history of the politics of different countries. Right. Then we go to number 213. Name the 3 Angolan movements in the source that signed the power sharing peace agreement. That is an extraction question. Don't need to waste time. We come here. We find that there is the National Liberation Front of Angola. Then we also have the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA. And we have the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola. These are the 3, 1, 2, and 3. These were the movements that signed a power sharing deal and formed a transitional government as they were preparing for formal elections. Right. Number 214. 214 is asking about comment on the implication of the statement. This was the Cold War, and every inch of the globe had to be contested with Soviet Union. This was the Cold War, and every inch of the globe had to be contested with the Soviet Union in the context of the USA's involvement in Angola. Right, what does that statement mean? It means the Soviet Union, wanted to take full control of Angola, or had intentions of making Angola communist. That is one response. And you can also say, on the other side, the USA was willing to fight against USSR through the liberation movements of Angola. Like what is saying here, it had to be contested. They had to contest, which means the USA was willing to fight. And those, remember, were the proxy wars. They were not fighting directly, but they were supporting different groups within the country to fight against each other and impose their ideologies. Or we can say the USSR's influence was getting widespread across the globe. USSR was trying to spread its influence across the globe. So it had to be contested. Wherever you go, you were supposed to contest with USSR because it was spreading its influence right across the whole world. So that is basically the implication of that historical statement. Right, we move to source number 2B. Source 2B, quote 1 reason from the source why the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, lobbied for greater American support to the FNLA. Right, why did they lobby for a greater support? We find the response in source 2B. We go to source 2B. We check here. The response, we find it here where it says, let's check here. When Russian assistance to the MPLA was resumed, the CAI lobbied or pushed in Washington for greater American support. So this is where our response is. The CAI lobbied for support from America after they saw that Russia was now giving assistance to the MPLA. When they resumed their assistance, or when they resumed their help to the MPLA, that is when they also felt that America was supposed to act and get involved with the FNLA. assist its side of capitalism, because Russia is now assisting its side of communism. So the response is here: when Russian assistance to MPLA was resumed. That is where we get our response. It's an extraction question from the source. Right, we move on to the next question. Number 2.22, it says, why do you think the USA provided financial support to FNLA during the Angolan transitional government? There is a transitional government which is a temporary government which is supposed to manage affairs when we are waiting for the formal elections to elect the legit government to lead the country. These three movements are now getting support from foreign countries. Why is it that America was giving assistance to FNLA during the transitional government? It's not yet election time. The government is stable, has been agreed upon the power sharing deal, but you start supporting one movement within the transitional government. What was the reason? Right, the reason there, it might be possibility that to enable FNLA to prepare fully for the elections that were to come. America, remember, they wanted influence of Angola. So they wanted the FNLA to prepare for the elections. They were giving them support so that they would prepare for the coming election. And also we can argue that they wanted to assist the FNLA to get support during the transitional government. They wanted the FNLA to be appealing to the people so that people would vote for them when it comes election time, so that they would win and America would be successful in its ideology of spreading capitalism. So they were preparing ahead of the elections. They wanted the FNLA to get support, and also they wanted it to fully prepare for the elections. Right, we'll go to number 2.22, 2.23. Explain the concept transitional government. I think we've been explaining it in passing. When we talk of a transition, we are saying we are having a temporary government. It's not a permanent government. When we talk of a transitional government, it's a government that is put in place. It's temporary. It's not a permanent. We put people to govern the affairs of the country temporarily while we are waiting to establish a formal government. So we'll be in a phase of transitional, political transition. A transition, we are in a phase of movement. We are coming from this state to the next state. So as we are moving from those one state to the other, it means we need a government which is going to manage the affairs temporarily. So in Angola, in the context of Angola here, we are saying there was a power sharing government which was put between the MPLA. This is the transition for Angola. In the context of Angola, it was a power sharing agreement between MPLA, the UNITA, and lastly the FNLA. They formed a unit government, which is a transition. It was going to be disbanded during elections, and we were supposed to identify who was supposed to lead. This was only temporal, and these three movements were jointly working together to manage the affairs of Angola whilst they were waiting for the formal elections to decide on the legit government to lead the country. Right. So basically that is the transitional government. We move to the next question, which is 2.24. Comment on how the USA's 1975 defeat in Vietnam influenced its involvement in Angola. I think you understand with your question number 4. It's an essay question, which is based on the war between America and the Viet Cong, where we saw America being humiliated by a small country of peasants. America, with its mighty, was defeated by a very small country, which is Vietnam. So why was America? Comment on how the US's defeat in Vietnam influenced its involvement. Why was America influenced by its defeat from Vietnam so that it got involved in Angola? Right. What we can argue there, we can argue for the fact that the Americans wanted to regain their pride. Remember, America was deemed to be a superpower. Then if you assume a position of a superpower and you get defeated by a very small country, you become a laughing stock of the world. So they want to revive their pride as a superpower. So by getting involved in Angola, they wanted to show countries of the world that they are still superpowers. Despite them being defeated in Vietnam, they can still prove that they are still superpowers in Angola by taking control of Angola. Or we can argue that besides reviving their pride, or you can argue that they wanted to prove to the world that they were a superpower. Pride was lost, and despite losing pride, they also wanted to prove to the world that they were still a superpower which can get involved in international affairs and be able to further their interests in such. Right, we'll go to the next question. Read source 2C. According to Denver, what would have happened if Cuba had not dispatched 36,000 troops to Angola? I think that is an extraction question. We just go to the source, we pick the correct response from the source. If we check here, it says, we're going to source 1C, it says South African invasion would have been successful if Cuba had not dispatched 36,000. So it means South Africa would have been successful if there was no incident of Cuba deploying such a big number of troops. That is how we answer that question. It's an extraction question, is there. What, according to the source, prompted Angolans to send a desperate appeal to Cubans for help? Right, our response, we get it here. It says, Angola sent a desperate appeal or request to Cuba for help. The military mission also told Fidel Castro that Cubans had to do something because Luanda was going to fall. The fact that the capital city was the core center for fighting. Once you lose control of the capital center, remember Luanda is the capital city of Angola, and they felt threatened that the coming or the invasion of South Africa, they were going to target to drive them into Luanda and apparently take over or seize the control of Luanda. It was a threat, and they felt threatened by the fact that if Luanda got to fall under the control of South Africa, then everything was done. So they had to ask for reinforcement because they felt threatened by the coming invasion by South Africa, which was targeting the capital of Luanda. Right, that is the response to that question. Move to the next question. Question number 1.2.3.3. Give two demands in the source that South Africans made for the administration. Right, what did South Africa claim to afford given the Angolan situation? If we check here, we find our responses. Right, it says if the Soviet Union intervened, they wanted the United States to intervene. That was one demand. They are saying if Russia is getting involved in this politics, let America also get involved. And their second demand was that the United States openly and fully endorsed South Africa's invasion in Angola. They wanted full approval, or they wanted America to fully disclose to the world that we are now having South Africa also being involved in the politics of Angola. Those were the two demands that were put by the SA Defense Forces as they got involved in Angolan politics. Right, we'll move on to the next question. Explain why, comment on why South Africa wanted open and full support from the USA for its invasion of Angola. Why did South Africa wanted an open endorsement for them to be involved in Angola? Right. Number one reason that you can argue, you can say South Africa wanted to show countries of the world that it was a dedicated supporter of capitalism. Remember, given the politics that were dominating in Angola, it was either capitalism and communism, with foreign countries, South Africa being part of the continent, they are also involved. What was their aim? They wanted to prove that we are all the side of the capitalists, and they wanted the world to see them being involved with America. It was like they wanted to prove to the world that they are pro-capitalists. And you can also argue that given the situation in South Africa that was there during that time, remember there were anti-apartheid movements. South Africans were trying to protest and fight against the apartheid government. They also wanted to threaten the local apartheid movements by showing off their relationship with the USA. Given that local people would see that USA is a close friend to the apartheid South African government, it also became a threat to those who were opposing apartheid. because America being a superpower, they felt threatened that the moment South Africa involves America in its affairs, that was going to be a very difficult challenge to those opposing apartheid. Or we can also argue that South Africa wanted to get relevance. Remember, South Africa is just a local country within the African continent, and is now getting involved in a fellow African continent, which is being dominated by extremely foreign countries. Talk of USA, talk of Russia, talk of Cuba. South Africa wanted to gain relevance because no other African country was involved in the politics of Angola. So it having something to do with Angola, it implies that they wanted to gain some form of relevance in their involvement in Angola. So we can argue that South Africans wanted to also get some form of relevance in their involvement. So if they were relating to America, then the world would justify that it's because of America that South Africa is getting involved in the politics of Angola. Right, we go to question number 2.3.5. Explain the reliability of the source to the researcher studying the reasons for the South Africa's participation in the Angolan Civil War. Right, we want to look at the reliability of sources. This question here is a little bit different from a question which is asking about usefulness, because usefulness and reliability, sometimes they are not the same. Something might be reliable but not useful, or something might be useful but not very reliable. Or reliability, you are saying, is it the truth? Is this source giving us a true picture of what happened? Can we say this is the truth of what happened? That is reliability. Right, so we try to check in the sources to try to identify what valid reasons that we can use to validate that this source is a reliable source to someone who wants to study about the involvement of South Africa in the war. Right, we can try to check here. It's an interview with this history professor at Johns Hopkins University. We can rely on this source because it was an interview that was done by a specialist in the field of history, and for that matter is a professor with a university. So given that the source is coming from a highly learned person, a highly learned person in the field of history, someone who is well experienced and who has got vast knowledge about the history of South Africa and the history of Africa at large, we can rely on that because the source of the information that we have there is very credible. So we can talk of the credibility of the source. And also, if we check, we have statistics here. These figures, they help us figure out if it's the truth of what actually happened, because we have the actual statistic of the number of troops that were deployed by the Cuban government to try and drive out South Africa from its invasion into Angola. So those statistics, we can also say they help us guarantee reliability of that source, because if it was non-evident that how many soldiers were deployed, we might not say we rely, or we might not say it's the truth. Or what else can we say? We also have prominent names being mentioned here. It mentions about Ford, who was the US president. It also, the source talks about the Cuban Fidel Castro. The source is also giving us the different foreign affairs minister. Kissinger is also giving us information on him. So basically, we can say that source is reliable because it's giving us the actual names and the prominent figures who were involved in the battle in Angola and who were directing the battle in Angola, the post-war in Angola. So we can also rely on it. And also, if we also try to check, this source is providing us an exact date. On 4th November, Fidel decided to send troops to Angola. So we can rely, because we are told of the exact date, which we can confirm with history. The 4th of November, that is the exact date on which the troops were deployed. And also, if we check this source, we can also corroborate it with other sources. The information that we are getting here is also agreeing with the other sources that we have. So basically that is what we can check and validate the reliability of that source. Right, we move on to the next question. It's question number 4, 2.4.1. Comment on the implication of the words in the cartoon. All major hemispheres accepted regarding Cuba's military support to other parts of the world. Right, we are now looking at source 1, source 2D. It's written here, all major hemispheres accepted. This is a gun shop by Fidel Castro, the leader of Cuba. So what is the implication if the shop is labeled all major hemispheres accepted? The implication here is that Cuba was prepared to support whoever wanted support from them, whether it's communism or capitalism. All major hemispheres, the major hemispheres are accepted into that shop. There is no discrimination, which means whoever wanted assistance was going to get assistance from whichever hemisphere, the north or the south, the communist world or the capitalistic world. Because remember, the world was divided into those two major hemispheres, the capitalistic world and the communist world. So if it's saying all major hemispheres accepted, it means Cuba was prepared to give support, or Cuba was prepared to offer support to whoever was willing to be assisted. Then we move on to number 2.4.2. Explain the implications of the words easy terms regarding Cuba's conditions of supporting Angola militarily. Right, if we check here, it's indicated that easy terms, the easy terms are indicated here and is clarified here. Easy terms, when we are doing businesses, we need to put easy terms for effective transactions to take place. We do not need to put stringent measures. We need to relax some control measures to make transactions effective and to make transactions easy. So this one is saying there are easy terms there. What is the implication of that? Right. Those are terms, they mean the support that was offered by Cuba did not have many strings attached. That is the implication of that. The support that Cuba offered did not have many strings attached. They were not attaching strings to their help. It was just easy to get support without so many complications and so many demands to be fulfilled. And also we can say Cuba would give unconditional support. They were not going to provide with so many conditions. Do this for us to give you support, or fulfill this to get support. They would give unconditional support. You want support, then we offer you what you want. That is an easy term. Then we move on to the next question, which is question number 2.4.3. Using the information in the source, comment on how Fidel Castro is depicted in the cartoon in terms of his foreign policy. He is a shop owner which is selling, if we check how he is portrayed, it's Fidel's gun shop. Is a president who is having a gun, which is a shop which is selling guns, and the gun shop is accepting all hemispheres, and the shop is having easy terms to whoever wants to get in. And if we also check, it says open, come in, which means people were free at any point in time to get to interact with him and get to agree with each other on how they can agree on assisting each other. Right. So what is the implication of that to how Fidel Castro was implementing his foreign policy? Right. There we can say his foreign policy was carefree. He was not considerate about what would happen in those countries, because if you are giving support to further fighting, it means you are not a person who is cautious. You are a carefree person. So we can say his attitude, his foreign policy attitude was carefree. Or we can also say he promoted proxy wars. Those wars that were fought in different countries because of the ideologies, the proxy wars. His foreign policy promoted proxy wars. Because if you are funding fighting, it means you want the fighting to continue. So he was promoting the proxy wars. Or you can also say Cuba had got vast resources at their disposal. Because if they are saying they can assist anyone from any hemisphere, it means they had enough resources. They had so many resources to support, or they had so much military resource to give out. So their foreign policy, they were just dishing out military support to whoever wanted. You cannot give if you do not have sufficient enough to sustain yourself. You can't fend for the next person. It means they had vast resources to fund their foreign policy. Right. We go to question 2.5. Refer to source 2C and source 2D. Explain how the evidence in source 2C supports the information in source 2D regarding the role Cuba played in the Angolan civil war. We are looking at the two sources, how they support each other. We use the same format of comparing sources. We do not compare them using different formats. We compare them using the format source 2C states that if it is a visual, we say it shows that source 2D is the one which is a visual. Understand which one is source 2D is a visual? Yes. So source 2C is a written, it's a text. So source 2C states that you indicate what is stated, right, which is supported by source 2D, which shows whatever is a cartoon. Whatever is shown on the cartoon, how does it relate to what is in that source? So you get 2 marks for the support. If you have identified something in source 2C which shows the same as what is shown on the cartoon, that is 2 marks. You go again, you find something else different, find another example. Source 2C says what? Says this. This is supported by source 2D, a cartoon showing whatever aspect of the cartoon you see there. You find 2 marks for yourself there, like that at the end you get 4 marks. That is the format that you should always follow when you are showing the support of sources, comparing sources, contrasting sources. Right. So we go to our question. We try to identify how those two sources are supporting each other. Right. If we check, we tend to find that in source 2C, let's first try to check source 2C and see how we can compare or show the support of the two sources. Right, if we go to source 2C here, right, so ramp of this, source 2C is talking about South African invasion would have been successful if Cuba had not dispatched 36,000 troops to push South African defense forces. Troops came from Cuba's intervention. So, and why was Cuba's intervention so decisive or influential on the ground? Right. We go on to this part here. It says, in early November 1975, as the South Africans were advancing along the coast, Angola sent a desperate appeal or request to Cuba for help. Right. We are taking this information here that Cuba deployed 36,000 troops to Angola after Angola sent a desperate appeal. Angola was desperate and they sent an appeal. Please assist us, we are having a challenge. And how is it that supported in source 1? This is an aspect. Angola sent a desperate appeal to Cuba to request for help, and Cuba sent them 36,000 troops. How is that relating to, or how is it that supported by source 2D? Source 2D, if you check here, is talking about easy terms. Angola just sent a request or an appeal. We are in trouble here, and all of a sudden 36,000 boom have been sent. So it's supporting each other. Source 2C says Angola sent a desperate appeal and received 36,000 troops which were sent to push the South African Defense Forces. This is supported by source 2D, which portrays Cuba as having easy terms of assistance. It did not ask them why they wanted assistance. It did not ask them to provide something to get assistance, but rather they sent an appeal and they received 36,000 troops. So it's supporting each other. Then also, if you also check there, source 2C is also talking about you got source 2C. It shows about as Fidel decided to send troops to Angola. He decided to send troops to Angola since source 2C. On 4 November, Fidel decided to send troops to Angola. This can be supported by this fact here, that all major hemispheres accepted. There were different hemispheres there, the two extreme hemispheres, the hemisphere of capitalism and the hemisphere of communism. There was a battle between capitalism and communism, but despite those hemispheres, Fidel Castro offered support, which meant that he was willing to accept offering support to any of the major hemispheres. Or we can also check that Angola sent a desperate request here for help. We can also use this. Angola sent a desperate appeal for help to Cuba, and this is supported by the label on the shop which says open, come in. It means that the Angolans, after facing difficulties, they were welcome to the shop, and it was open at that particular point in time because it did not take time for them to get assistance, which meant that the shop was always open for people to come in and get support. So you see how we try to relate the sources and show how they support each other. That is how we pick aspects and try to show how two sources support each other. Right. Then we move on to the last question. The last question, which is a paragraph question. We'll just go through the discussion of how we answer that one quickly. And when answering a paragraph question, the same format applies. We use the PUL format: point, explanation, evidence or examples. Then you link back your argument to the question. The question is saying about 8 lines. Explain why foreign countries became involved in the Angolan Civil War. This question is a little bit tricky because these two the questions will be either why foreign countries got involved, which means it's reasons for involvement of foreign countries in Angola. Then if a question says how foreign countries, because those questions usually, the paragraph question for Angola, they will come as why foreign countries were involved, like this one that we have is talking about why foreign countries were involved. Why, which means we need reasons for involvement. Then if it is the how question, we want to look at the methods of intervention, of involvement. Which methods were used? Did those countries get involved physically by sending troops, or they were sending support, they were sending military support, or they were sending financial aid? That is how. So these questions you should pay attention to the instruction. how and why. This one is a why. We want reasons for the involvement of foreign countries. Right. So when you are starting your paragraph question, you need to start with a clear statement. The question is talking about why countries were involved in Angola. So we said when you are starting your paragraph question, you should start with a point which is very clear, or start with a line of argument which points out a clear statement. Right, so I can start my paragraph like with my point would say, foreign countries became involved in Angola mainly because of the differing ideologies of capitalism and communism. That can be my opening statement. It's a clear point. I have given that foreign countries became involved in Angola, and why were they involved is mainly because of the ideas of capitalism and communism. Now I have to explain in my own words, giving an explanation. America and its allies, which is Britain and France, wanted to stop the spread of communism in Angola through the influence of the USSR. I'm further explaining, however, there were also other reasons behind the involvement of other countries in Angola besides the two extreme ideologies of capitalism and communism. I have given my explanation. Then I go on to provide evidence. The evidence that I can give here, I can give evidence of a USA because it's evidence from a source. USA wanted to deny Angola to Russians because of its good harbors and also because of its oil. This is in source 2A. I am figuring out the reasons for involvement of America. I have figured out in my own ways that America wanted to stop the spread of communism. But however, there is other evidence which shows why America was involved in Angola. It was interested in the oil in Angola and also interested in the harbors. That is in source 2A. I can also further give evidence on America, which is in the source. USA wanted to regain its damaged image after Vietnam defeat. That is why it was also involved. It wanted to prove to the world that it was still a superpower after it was defeated in Vietnam in 1975. So that is also in source from source 2B. I'm quoting my sources. Then I can also give my own knowledge about the involvement of Cuba. Why was Cuba involved? And why did Cuba got also involved? Cuba was worried about its independence away from the domination by the USSR in its communist bloc. Remember, Cuba was dominated by Russia and wanted also its own independence out of the control by Russia in the communist bloc. So it also got involved in Angola for that reason. And if I can also look at South Africa, I can also use my own knowledge to give reasons as why South Africa was involved in Angola. We can say South Africa wanted to prove to the USA that it was worth to be an ally, as it was an anti-communist. So that is the reason for South Africa. South Africa also wanted to prove to America that they were also against communism and they would offer to support American capitalistic ideology. That is my own knowledge. Then I need to link back to the question. The question is saying why countries were involved. So I can link my paragraph by saying, as such, all countries that prevailed in Angola had shared reasons and also had own reasons for getting involved in the battle in Angola. That is my link. I'm showing that some countries had got shared visions or had got shared reasons, like that reason of capitalism and communism. It was shared, but however, some other countries had got their own private missions as to why they got involved in Angola. I will end my paragraph like that. So you see, the paragraph has got a point, has got explanations, has got evidence. My explanation is in my own words. I am not taking from the sources. I am explaining from a historical perspective based on the knowledge that I have gathered, and I have managed to link back my statement to the key question or to the line of argument that I would have adopted at the beginning of the paragraph question. Right. We are done with the Angolan question. We quickly move on to question number 4, which is an essay question on the extension of Cold War, a case study for Vietnam. Right. With this essay, we won't spend much time. We just highlight on how you answer the essay question, which techniques do you need to employ, and how best you can explain, give evidence. You can present a point, give evidence, link, give examples, and link your statements, and you're creating coherent paragraphs which are in the context of the question. Right. The question says, question number 4, extended of Cold War Vietnam case study. The military tactics applied by the United States of America succeeded in defeating the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War between 1963 and 1975. Our key aspect here is the tactics succeeded. Right. Then we underline this. Tactics succeeded. And do you agree with this statement? Use relevant historical evidence to support your line of argument. Right. What you should do with this question? The question is, do you agree? When you are answering this question, you must answer the question and show whether you are agreeing or you are disagreeing with the statement. Why you should adopt a correct line of argument is you know the results of the war. So you should never adopt a wrong line of argument. When the question is saying, do you agree? Then you agree to something which is inaccurate or which is historically wrong or which you do not have evidence to substantiate your argument. That is going to give you a challenge in the presentation because you won't be able to support. You end up wandering around and failing to sustain your line of argument. So what you need to do with that question is you need to take a stance or you need to take a line of argument which is historically correct. We know that in 1975, Vietnam became a communist state. America, under the President Nixon, he did Vietnamization, where he withdrew American troops from Vietnam, and America accepted defeat, and Vietnam was united under communist rule. So there is no way we can say America succeeded in defeating Vietnam when we know the results that America was humiliated in that war. So we have to disagree with this statement. In no way we have to disagree because we know the results. So what you need to do now is when you're writing an introduction, you need to answer the question. And you need to give a reason why you are choosing to answer that question that way. Because your introduction should address 3 basic things. Right. When you're writing your introduction, maybe just for the sake of discussion, quick discussion, right, what you need to do first is to answer the question. And when you're answering the question, we also want you to give a reason or the because part. Then we want elaboration or we want orientation. What are we saying here? Answer the question. We have 3 sets of questions that are used. We have, do you agree? Like the one that you have. We have a question which says, to what extent? And we have a question which says, critically discuss. These are the 3 questions that you find. You need to answer the question first. Show whether you are agreeing or you are disagreeing. Show the extent and show whether you are approving or you are disapproving the statement with both positive and negative statements or evidence. You are answering the question. Then give a reason why you have taken that line of argument. Why did you agree to that? What is the reason for you agreeing or disagreeing that America's strategies were successful? That's the reason. And we want an elaboration. What is the essay going to prove? Because at the end of the day, you should tell a story. You should tell a historical story which has got context and which has got meaning. What are you going to present in that essay? What historical evidence are you going to use? What are you going to elaborate on? Orient the reader so that they know what they are going to expect in the essay. That is your introduction. So these are the basics for the introduction. If your introduction is failing to address this, which means it's not a proper introduction or it's not properly contextualized, it's not a right introduction for the essay. That is how you present your introduction. So let's go to this question and try to apply this to our question. Right, we have seen that in this war, America lost. Then we cannot waste time saying or agreeing to that wrong historical statement, because we know the outcome of the American Viet Cong War of between 1963 and 1975, that America was defeated and was humiliated. So we do not need to take the wrong side of the argument. So here we go to our question, and remember also we don't need to use personal pronouns. I agree, no, that is not allowed in the essay. We cannot say I agree. So what you can do here when you are starting, you can say in agreement, the military tactics that were applied by the USA succeeded. That is if you are agreeing. If you are disagreeing, in disagreement, the tactics by the USA did not succeed in defeating the Viet Cong. Or in disagreement with this statement, the tactics applied by the USA were ineffective in defeating the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War between 1963 and 1973. You don't need just to copy the statement, but you need to give a reason as to why, because you need to give a relevant historical evidence. Or you can say this full essay fully agrees, or this essay is in disagreement with the statement. You are avoiding the usage of the personal pronoun I, because it's a don't in an essay. This essay fully agrees or partially agrees, or this essay fully disagrees, or this essay proves to disagree with the statement that. You are showing your line of argument. You are answering the question. And then you need to give a reason. The definite reason is America was humiliated by the Viet Cong, and Viet Cong managed to get united under communist control. That is the result of the war. And you go to elaboration, you tell us what the essay is going to prove. This essay is going to prove on the tactics that were used by the United States of America in the war against Vietnam between the year of 1963 and 1975. The reader knows now what they are going to expect in the essay. Then you go to your essay. The body of your essay, you can start with the background information, but you are not much advised to spend time on the background information. Or in some instances, you can leave the background information because there are no marks for the background information, because you are not answering the question. If you spend more time on the background information, explain the situation in Vietnam, the Geneva Conference, the Vietnam being split into North and South, the North being communist, the South being capitalistic under Diem who refused the elections, what. Those things, they fall under the background, because the question here is on the tactics. It's looking at the tactics, which means you can spend the whole 30 minutes discussing about the background. There are no marks for that. You are not answering the question. You should go straight to answer the question. Go to the tactics. Under the tactics, you need also to apply the skill of peel. The tactics, I think the majority of you will know them. We'll just highlight and briefly explain them. We look at the tactics, and in this instance here, you are looking at either the tactics of USA. You cannot look at one side because a war is two-sided. And then you look at the tactics by Viet Cong. And in your explanation and in your link, you should show that these tactics, they were ineffective. They led to America losing the war. And you should show that these tactics were effective and they led to the Viet Cong winning the war. So under America, there are so many tactics that were used by the American forces. So we can start by looking at operations like Rolling Thunder. Right, Operation Rolling Thunder, we just explained it in passing. It was a mass bombing technique whereby America was using the jet bombers. They were trying to bomb their enemy. But however, it was ineffective because they were also targeting industrial sites for the Viet Cong. But however, they failed because Vietnam was mainly a farming country. So that technique failed. And also you can check on Operation Range Hand. This Operation Range Hand had got two chemicals which were used. There was Agent Orange and Agent Blue. Agent Orange was targeting to destroy the forests, and this one was targeting to destroy crops. The target here was the Americans were facing a challenge in identifying their enemy because they were hiding in the thickets, they were hiding in the forest. So they decided to spray the forests with this chemical Agent Orange, which would destroy the forests. But however, was it effective? This led to America being criticized on the effect of environmental damage because they destroyed so many hectares of forests, and that was not good for the image of America, because environmentalists were now arguing that we are in a war, not an environmental war. You are now destroying the environment instead of you fighting your enemy. So America ended up withdrawing from usage of this tactic, and hence it lost through the usage of the Agent Orange. Agent Blue, they were destroying crops for the farmers, the Viet Cong farmers. They wanted to starve them of food. But however, did it work? It did not work. And also it also led to soil infertility. It also affected the soil. The soil became infertile for so many years. It was also an environmental injustice, destroying the soil and causing harm to the soil in an effort to try and starve your enemy. Right. Then we can also look at the search and destroy. The name suggests USA was trying to search for the enemy and destroy, but however it was difficult for them to effectively see who their enemy is, given that the Viet Cong guerrillas were blending well with the environment and also did not have any specific uniform to identify them. So the search and destroy, it also failed. Then you can also check on the American strategy that they used, or you can criticize them for sending young and inexperienced soldiers. The Americans were undermining the Viet Cong and sent young and inexperienced soldiers. These soldiers were heavily defeated and embarrassed in Vietnam. And America at the end could not win using such a tactic of sending inexperienced soldiers. Then you can also talk of the safe village policy, or the hamlet, whereby America was trying to split villagers from the guerrillas so that they would know who the guerrillas were. But however, it did not work. The Viet Cong operated in the villages. When they were putting an effort to separate the guerrillas from the villagers will also be part of the villagers, because what they would do, they were farmers during the day and fighters at night. So it was difficult for the Americans to identify them. At the end of the day, the villagization did not work, and it is leading to America's defeat. Then you can also talk of the My Lai massacre. This was a mass killing which was done in a village which was termed My Lai, where Americans were fooled to believe that it was a village for the guerrillas. They went there trying to identify the guerrillas and bombed the citizens of the village, only to find that there were not even guerrillas in that village. So this led to America being criticized for atrocities. It was an act of cruelty. How would you kill innocent people in masses who are not even fighting against you? Then you can also argue on America using chemical warfare. America also, besides using Operation Range, they were also using some form of chemical warfare, whereby we can mention that they were using a chemical which was termed napalm, which was a very deadly chemical which would burn the human body. So they would use that chemical which would attach to the human body and it would burn the body to death. So people would be affected by that napalm and also would be burnt to the bones. It was a very strong chemical which would burn the moment it gets attracted to the human body. So it was a form of chemical warfare, you can argue, using that chemical warfare by America. And you can mention an example of napalm. Yes, it was also an act of atrocities when you are criticizing it. It was an act of great cruelty to kill your enemy in such a way that they burn to death and they endure the pain of the burning chemical. It was an act of very great cruelty against humanity. So America's image was now getting bad in the world. And also in America, there were protests now. People were starting to protest against the involvement of America in Vietnam, leading to America getting to Vietnamize and withdraw from America. And when you are looking at the side of the Viet Cong, you also look at the strategies by the Viet Cong. What were they doing which made them succeed in that particular war? Right here under the Viet Cong, you talk of unconventional strategies. You look at guerrilla tactics. The Viet Cong used guerrilla tactics where they used hit and run. They avoid steering with their enemy face to face. They would hit and disappear. So this made the American troops ineffective because they would not identify who their enemy was and where they were coming from. And they would be attacked from surprise. And also you can talk of the tunnels, whereby the guerrillas would dig tunnels for hiding, and those tunnels had got supply of food, they had kitchens, they had supply of basics, they had clinics, whereby they would take care of the injured ones, and which meant that they strengthened their side. And also you can talk of the Viet Cong getting support from locals. The local farmers were supporting the Viet Cong, offering them whatever they needed in the war so that they would strengthen and keep on fighting. And in return, the Viet Cong were offering support also, and were offering help to the farmers, and were also promising them land under the unity with North Vietnam. They were promising that the moment we get united under communism, we're going to give you enough land for you to do farming. So the locals were offering them support, which further strengthened their side. And then you can talk of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was a trek which went through Laos and Cambodia, whereby the North Vietnam would give support, military support to the South Vietnam through that Ho Chi Minh Trail, which meant they strengthened their side by getting supplies from North Vietnam, which they would use in the Southern Vietnam. And also we cannot argue that America tried to bomb this Ho Chi Minh Trail, tried to bomb the passageway which was used to supply weapons to the South Vietnam from North. But however, Russia would quickly replace whatever was damaged, which made America ineffective. And also you can argue on the side of the Viet Cong, they also did not wear uniform, which made it difficult for the guerrillas for the American soldiers to spot them and be able to differentiate them from the normal villagers. And also we can argue that they were blending with the environment, which also made it difficult for the Americans to identify their enemy. And you show how these tactics assisted America in the Viet Cong in winning the war against America. Then at the end, we argue that the Vietnam was united. America Vietnamized, they withdrew from Vietnam, and Vietnam was united under communist rule. Then you put your conclusion. In your conclusion, you tie up your argument. You tie up or reaffirm key points of your discussion. You do not need to repeat the way you presented your ideas in the body, or you also don't need to introduce anything new in the conclusion. You need just to tie up your points and end your discussion. That is basically on the essay question on Vietnam. Right, we move on to the last essay question, which is question number 5, which is the essay question on the Congo, the case study from Congo, independent Africa. Right, it says Mobutu Sese Seko brought positive changes to the Congo through his political, economic, and social policies. that were introduced immediately after attaining independence in 1960. Critically discuss. Right, this question here is a critical discussion. What you need to do in your line of argument, you need to adopt a line of argument which shows that you are approving the statement or you are disapproving the statement. What are we saying here? Approving the statement, we are saying that statement is historically correct, that Mobutu brought positive changes to the Congo. And which will also mean that your argument will be biased towards that more than the other side. If you are approving the statement, you are saying whatever was done by Mobutu under his when he got into power, it brought something positive on the politics of the country and on the economy and on the society of the people of Congo. But however, it's a critically discussed. You need to note that it was not only the positive that were brought, he also brought some disastrous effects to the aspects of life of people in Congo. Because it's a critically discussed, you need to provide both positive and negative evidence. If you are disapproving the statement, you are saying that statement is not historically correct. We cannot completely say Mobutu brought positive changes. No, he did not. So when you are disapproving, you are showing that Mobutu did not bring a complete positive changes. Or Mobutu brought disastrous effects. Or his changes were negative to the Congo through his political and economic policies. But however, it was not only that he was very bad, he also managed to bring some positive aspects to the politics or the economy of the Congo. That is when you are disapproving the statement. And you need to give a reason why. You say Mobutu brought positive changes. Why are you saying he brought positive changes? You can give a generalized reason why you are saying there were positive changes. What happened to the politics of Congo after he got into power? Or what happened to the economy of Congo when he got into power? If people's life drastically improved, that is a positive move. Overall, if the politics of Congo became stable, he managed to silence rebellion of the Katanga people, that is a positive political move. Or if on the social life of people got to adopt a new African way of life which was pleasant to them, it's a positive move. So it's a generalized historical reason that you can give to support why you said he brought positive changes. Or if you are saying he did not bring any positive change, what evidence are you going to use, or what's the reason to that? You need to give historical reasons as to why you are saying he did not bring, or for example, he rose to become a dictator and abused people's democratic rights. That is the politics. Or the economy of Congo went into a downturn. The GDP went to drastic levels. That is a negative implication on the economy or on the social life. Education. He withdrew education and many of the citizens could not afford to send their kids to school, leading to an increase or a rise in the levels of illiteracy in the country. That is a negative implication on society. So you need to support your argument. You need to indicate how you are going to support your argument. Right. So we go to the question, you give a reason, and then we elaborate. This one here in the introduction, you need to give both positive and negative. If you are approving the statement, you give the positive side. You are saying he brought positive, you give positive evidence. And you also prove that it was not only the positive that was brought, he also brought some negative implications on the economy. You give evidence in the very introduction to show that it's a critique, it's a critical discussion. Critical discussion is either way around. You are providing with both positive and negative evidence. So we'll just go to our points and briefly discuss in as fast as is possible. We just highlight the points and briefly discuss them, and also show the impacts, the positive or the negative impacts. Right. The question is saying the political, then it's saying the economic and social. We will start with the political. We just highlight the points, we briefly explain, we move on to the next point and show how we can argue on those points. Right, under political, we know the politics of Congo were transformed. Political, right, we look at how Mobutu got into power, got through a military coup. We can create a paragraph based on this. Was this a positive move in the politics of the country? We can argue that Mobutu getting to power through a military coup shows that he had a disregard for people's democratic right to elect their own leaders, which implies that it was a bad political move for a person to get into power without being democratically elected. Right? That is the first idea. Or you can talk of him becoming a military dictator. Mobutu, when he got into power, he became a military dictator. We talked about a dictator where we said he's a leader with absolute power. Dictator. How did that impact? He abused people's rights. He abused people's rights in so many dimensions. Being a military dictator, people are not allowed to comment or to give their views to the decisions by the leader. So he abused people's rights. But however, you can also argue that despite him being a dictator, when he got into power, he managed to silence the rebellion that was there. There was a rebellion which was ongoing, where the Katanga people were saying we want our own independence. But because he had absolute power over everything, he managed to silence them, and that rebellion got to an end. It's a positive move, you can argue, using that argument. Then you can also talk of, there are some policies which are more of economic and related also to politics. We cannot clearly say it's political or clearly say it's economic. They are either way around depending on how you are explaining them. Or before we look at those ones, we can look at his cult of Mobutuism. He introduced a cult of Mobutuism around him, whereby people were supposed to praise him as the good leader, as the father of the nation, and they were praising him in song and dance. Was it good for people to praise a leader as their mini god on earth? You can argue based on social reasoning. Was it a good move? Was it a bad move? How did it impact on the people if they were made to praise him at any point in time? If it was effected in the curriculum so that we praise our president, was it a good move? How did it impact on the politics of the country? And then you can also talk of creation of a one-party state. Mobutu banned other political parties and only allowed for the operation of his own one political party. Was it a positive move that we ban other political parties? It's not a good move because we are denying people of their political right. He denied people of their democratic right. People should have democratic rights to elect leaders and to affiliate to political parties that they want. But now, given that all other political parties were banned, and it was mandatory that all Congolese people were supposed to affiliate to that one political party, it was a way of denying people their rights. If you have any positive argument to argue for that, you can argue that a one-party state is more stable than a country whereby we have so many political parties. It will lead to political instability. So if you are arguing for, you can argue a one-party state as a measure to try and attain stability in the country, such that there is no civil dispute and there is no political violence in the country because of differences in affiliation to different political parties. Right. Then we can also talk of his policy of kleptocracy. It can be argued as political or economic. Because of his position, he was able to implement a self-enriching policy. People would openly, because they would be closely linked to the president, they would not fear anything. People would openly steal from the state resources, from the state coffers. They would openly steal state resources and for their own benefit. So at the end, Mobutu, because of his politics of nepotism, employing his close friends, his close and close family members, he ended up creating a group of very rich people who were close to him through the policy of kleptocracy, which was a self-enriching policy, which was featured with corruption and nepotism. So it was bad for the politics that you put people in positions whom you are closely related to, which we can also argue as nepotism. And those people, because of their link to you as the president, they do whatever they feel can do because no one is going to have them account for their actions. So at the end, it led to a very disastrous effect on the politics of the country. Right, there are so many things that we can mention. We move on to the economy. His economic policies. How did they impact? Did they impact positively or impact negatively? You talk of nationalization. Nationalization of mainly of the mines. Nationalization. Mobutu introduced nationalization where he took control of privately owned businesses and made them public. He transformed the ownership of private businesses into state-owned enterprises. And that did not help. People were appointed to run those businesses. In most instances, they failed. And at the end, the GDP of the country dropped. It fell because of mismanagement and poor business ideas being implemented by taking over. And mainly what he took there, he took for his own benefit, not for the benefit of the state. It was also mainly taken for the benefit of him and his close family members. That was the disadvantage of that nationalization move. Then he also introduced what was called the Zairenization. Zairenization, this was a policy whereby he was saying the Zaire people should come first. He was replacing foreigners with locals, with local people, which means for positions which were held by foreigners, they were removed and were replaced by local Congolese people. But remember, those people were very incompetent in holding some of the positions. And at the end, it negatively impacted on the economy. The economy went on to a downturn because of inexperienced people being made to do what they cannot do. Putting people into positions because they are Congolese, but not because they know what they should do. That was a very bad move. But however, you can argue that it was good because he was trying to uplift his own society, was trying to do good for his own people, was trying to uplift the status of his own people, though at the end it was a failure. Right, then you can go and look at corruption. There were so many acts of corruption that were done. Because of nepotism, it led to corruption. People were so corrupt and were stealing state resources to their own benefit, and that impacted negatively on the economy of the country. Then you can also talk of retrocession. Retrocession was a way to try and reverse Zairenization. We are saying they were replacing foreigners with inexperienced local people, and they also nationalized some of the privately owned companies. These companies were nationalized without compensation. The owners of these companies were made to seize ownership of their companies without compensation. Then they left the country, and that affected the countries negatively. Experienced people, mainly the Belgians, they left and they went back to Europe and to other parts of the world where they would do business without interference of the government or without negative implication of the government. So it meant that the economy of Congo was negatively affected by this process of nationalization and also this Zairenization. The economy went into a downturn. So however, I wanted to reverse that by retrocession. This was an act which was put in place to try and lure back those people who had left their businesses, to try to bring them back. He was now trying to persuade those people, the previous owners of the business, to come back and proceed with running their businesses after realizing failure of local people. But however, only a few returned. The rest opted not to return because they were so much disappointed by the way they were chased out of their businesses and the way they were removed from their positions. So if only a few returned, and that meant that the economy did not realize much positive results from the return of the few people. The rest did not come back, which was a failure again. And also we can argue on the elitism. Mobutu created what was called an elite group. People who were close to him were able to attain a better life through corrupt means or through nepotism. They were able to acquire riches for themselves, and they became extremely rich above ordinary citizens. So the Congo economy was in such a way that there was a very wide gap, or there was a very big disparity between the rich and the poor. They were the extremely rich and the extremely poor. Because of the economy, how it was being run, an ordinary citizen who did not have connections or who was not linked would fall into becoming a poor person, while it's those who were linked and who benefited from corruption, they became very rich. So the gap between the rich and the poor in the economy became very pronounced, which is not good for the economy. That is why the government tries to attain equitable income distribution. But in this instance, it failed because Mobutu did not take care of those who were disadvantaged by the system. He only took care of his immediate and close friends who benefited from the system that he put in place. So that was elitism. Then we also look at there was also a lack of vibrant manufacturing sector. The economy, because people were inexperienced, the manufacturing sector was not vibrant, which meant that manufacturing was not going very well, and the economy could not prosper without manufacturing. You get raw materials, you have raw materials, you can't process them. They had minerals, but they could not process such minerals, which meant the economy did not prosper much from those raw materials. And at the end, the economy collapsed and started relying on foreign aid. A country with resources now is relying on foreign aid from the USA. It shows that it was a failure of his policies. The economy of Congo collapsed, and it led the economy to fully rely on support from foreign countries, and mainly from the USA. That was where they were getting much of their support from. So it shows that whatever he did as a leader of the economy, it provided more negative results to the economy than good. It did more harm than good to the economy of Congo. So as you argue, you try to argue and make a critique. And remember, in your arguments, you should refer back to your line of argument as a linking statement. When you are concluding every paragraph, when you are ending every paragraph, you should ensure that you provide a linking statement which refers back to the question or which forwards the argument to the next paragraph. That is basically how you should structure your presentation for you to be able to get a good mark for a presentation. Unless, if you cannot do that, it will also mean that your chances of scoring a good presentation mark will be very limited. And remember, for a critically discussed question, always find a critique against whatever you are saying in your discussion, so that your discussion continues and is balanced as a critical discussion. Right, we go on to the last part of the essay question, which is the section on the social part of the economy of Congo. We are now looking at the social. Right, under social, we are going to look at the policy of authenticity. This is the major policy that we can discuss under social. Right, here under authenticity, it was a policy of adopting or changing Congo into a more African society. He did not want Congo to be like a European society. He wanted it to be a distinct African society, a society which you can actually see as African. So he was trying to change the social life of people to make them adopt to an authentic African way of life. Right. Under this policy, we look at names of individuals. Then you also look at names of places, of towns and cities. You also look at the name of the country itself. Then you can also go and look at dressing. All these, they fall under the authenticite policy. Right. Under the names of individuals here, Mobutu was trying to create a distinct African society, which is seen by the naming, or which is evident by the way people are named. He believed that African people should have African names. So those names were supposed to be Africanized, and they were supposed to be true African names based on the languages, the indigenous languages of Congo. What was the implication? Given that a person already was named, and now there's a new policy which wants you to be African. You have a European name. Maybe some people had got Belgian names since it was a Belgian colony. So now, they had French names rather. Now they wanted them to adopt a more African way of naming. People were forced to drop their names and were made to adopt new African names, which meant that people were supposed to change their names. Those who had Christian names, who were baptized mainly in the Catholic, were supposed to change their names and adopt more African names, which were based upon the indigenous languages of Congo. And also he himself is led by example. Remember, he was named Desire Mobutu. That was his original name. But because of authenticity, he wanted people to believe that he was meaning what he was saying. He changed his name to Mobutu Sese Seko Wazabanga. Mobutu Sese Seko Wazabanga, whatever. It's a very long name. So you see him adopting this very long name here, which is African. He was trying to lead by example to show the people of Congo that he was serious. He wanted a true African society, not these European names of desire. And also remember, they were missionaries who were operating. The Christian missionaries who were baptizing people and giving people religious and those Christian names. They were banned. Apparently, he banned those missionaries, and he even threatened to send them to jail if they kept on baptizing people and giving them Christian names and European names. So it was a very despotic move towards individuals. And you can argue that people need to be identified the way they want. It was an abuse of human identity. You cannot enforce a name to someone. People need to identify themselves the way they want. So that can be an argument, a negative argument. Or if you want to argue it positively, you can argue that it was a positive move because it was now a more African society in an African country. If you can argue positively. Then also he changed the names of towns. Major towns names were changed, and cities. Kinshasa, the capital city, was formerly having a European name, but it was changed, and he renamed it to Kinshasa, which is now the current name of the capital of the country. Right. It was called Elizabethville, but was changed to Kinshasa, which is now the current name for the capital city. It's named Kinshasa, which is more African, changing from Elizabethville. Right. And also, if you check the country itself, under Belgian rule, under Leopold, it was called Congo, but he changed the name to Zaire, which is more African. And also on dressing, he enforced dressing which was not resembling the white way of dressing. He abolished the collar and adopted what was called the abacus, which is the Mao style, the Chinese style, whereby men would wear those shirts without collar. that was also viewed as African. Right, so basically that are some of the moves that were initiated by him in an effort to create a more African society. Then you can also check on what he did to the education of Congo. Right, when Mobutu came into power, there were so few people who were learned, who had acquired a university education. There were so many few university graduates in Congo. But when he came to power, what he did there was more of a disaster than a positive move. Right. Given that he was doing all these moves to Africanize the country, he failed to change the medium of instruction, which is the language of teaching and learning. French remained the medium of instruction. If you want a more African society, then why are you still using a colonizer's language? This was a failure. For him failing to change the medium of instruction, it indicated that he did not transform the education system. If he really wanted the education system to be transformed and to be African, he was supposed to start by changing the medium of instruction, but he could not do that. So whatever way you argue, you can argue against that to show that he failed to transform education by maintaining the old language which was used by the Belgians and failed to introduce a new language of teaching and learning in schools. And also you can argue he withdrew funding. For education. The old government, the Belgian government, was funding primary education, but he, when he got into power, he failed to keep pace with the funding of the education. And what did he do? He withdrew the funding, and at the end, it brought in negative implications on the people of the society of the people of Congo. People could not afford the education. They failed to afford sending their kids to school, given that they were receiving funding from the government in the old system. Now the government withdrew funding. It brought in more disastrous effect to the people who were supposed now to fend for the education of their kids. And much of them, given the economic situation, they were not privileged to get the benefits of the country. And they failed to send their children to school, which was a very negative implication, which led to a very negative effects on the society of Congo. Then you can also argue on him failing to take care of the civil service. Mobutu failed to pay teachers. Teachers went unpaid for months, which is also a negative implication and was a demotivating factor to the work of teachers. You cannot work while you are not receiving your dues, you're not receiving what you're supposed to get. So teachers went unpaid for months because of his maladministration. He was failing to balance between a state income and the state expenditure. At the end of the day, he failed to cater for the welfare of the civil service, and ending up teachers going for months without being paid. So you check on such arguments and you try to explain, and remember, when you're explaining, you need to create full paragraphs from the points that you would have noted, and try to link them back to the line of argument. Right, I think with the evidence that we have, if we were to develop full paragraphs from the points, starting from the political measures that were put in place, moving on to the social factors, moving on to the economic policies, and then lastly the social policies that he implemented, we can actually see that we'll be in a position to create and come out with a very good and sound essay with historical evidence which ultimately supports our line of argument. And then we'll go to the conclusion. When you are concluding, you are just summing up your key points without repeating them the way you said, or you cannot introduce a new aspect in the conclusion. Then you end up a 1 by 2 you should also note that it's a question that requires you to give a detailed explanation that is going to give you 2 marks. And also, we mentioned about the comparison questions, like we talk of. We might also have a 2 by 1. We've mentioned about that. The 1 by 2, like this one. A 3 by 1, it means you should give 3 different responses with 1 mark each. And when you get this question like a 2 by 2, I think like what I have mentioned earlier on, you should try to identify 2 different responses answering the question, because each response will be worth 2 marks. So the 2 by 2, it means 2 responses with 2 marks each to give a total of 4 marks. And when we go to our comparison question or a contrast question where we need to show how sources support each other or how sources differ from each other, we also need to be very articulate in the way we answer those questions. Like for example, this question of how do sources differ from each other, we need to find 2 different responses which show or which clearly indicate how the 2 sources will be differing from one another. Then you can also check on the paragraph question, like what I've indicated. When you are looking at your paragraph questions, is a reminder, you do not need to just go to the sources and extract the information like most of the learners do. You need to follow the PIL format, whereby you need to start by answering the question. After you answer the question, then you will explain in your own words. Explain according to your understanding, the knowledge that you have, what you have learned. You explain that particular aspects that you have answered in the opening statement of your point. And as you explain, you do not extract anything from the sources. You are using your own knowledge. And after you are done explaining on your own knowledge, that is where now you can get to the sources to get supporting evidence, because the sources, they are used to provide relevant evidence to the question or to the explanation. So you can now consult the sources where you need to extract relevant information which you can use to substantiate the arguments that you would have raised in the explanation. And also be mindful, remember, it's not only what you have got from the sources that counts as the evidence. You also need to add your own knowledge, because you are learning these aspects, you have them in the mind, you have studied them. You also need to add aspects of your own to the evidence that you are going to use in the presentation. And when you are now coming to the end of your discussion, the end of your essay, your paragraph question, you need to come out with a linking statement, whereby you give a statement that relates back to your line of argument, or that refers back to the question which was asked by in the first instance. So basically, those are the skills that we need to have, and we need to keep them at our fingertips, so that the moment you get to the examination, the moment you get to a history examination, you must be very aware of such techniques and such skills. We should constantly revisit them and check on how you can improve on each and every aspect of those skills.